Welcome to Northern Colorado Amateur Radio Club. To all new hams, this is Kilo Fox Zero, Colorado Boy.
That says 9 o'clock. We can probably get started. So this presentation initially started off, and I did it last year here, as Things in Space. It's been revamped, revised, because a lot of interesting stuff has happened in the satellite world in the last year. So it's, thanks to Wayne, I changed it over to Chasing Satellites. And you know, satellites, of course, are things in space that should interest you guys. There's a lot of stuff up there. So anyway, I'm Doug, N6UA, and that's me, my first exposure to ham radio, and obviously I'm also the Zero District director for Old Timers Club. So, anyway, I was licensed back in '66 during the sunspot cycle, you know, lots of DX. I was in Utah as a novice, less than 800 hams. I did some traffic, you know, for Vietnam. You know, I was a Mars station, did T-hunts, played around on 2-meter AM. Things have changed since then. And I first discovered satellites in 2014, you know, when W1AW/0 was operating for the Centennial or whatever it was for W1AW. Anyway, here I am many years later, you know, wishing that that was my station, but it's not. So what's in it for you? I mean, why are you here? So looking at it, this is an area of high-tech operation that techs can participate in. So you don't need a fancy extra class license like, you know, my cousin on Twitter, who's a satellite guy down in, you know, the Phoenix area, gets after me and says, "Is this another one of those extra things?" I said, "No, this is great for techs. And if you have antenna restrictions, I live in a condo in Estes Park. So I can't do a big beam, a tower, anything else that I want. So I've got a stealth dipole laying on the roof of the condo, 40 meter, and hey, it works just fine. There's seats up front if you like. And it's something that you don't need some really fancy equipment to make happen, you know, to make it all work. So anyway, today I'm going to talk about some of the natural stuff. This is going to be a really short portion of the presentation. I'm going to talk about man-made stuff. I'm going to pass this little guy around. This is, as we get into the presentation, oh, I should pass it around, starting up front. This is what's a real scale model of a CubeSat. This is, you know, a 1-1 model. So, and there are boards inside that were, you know, we'll look at that a little bit later. And then, you know, how do you use all this information? That's the agenda for today. So the natural stuff, stars, which that guy is the sun and has probably the biggest impact on our propagation and, you know, our planet. We've also got the moon. It's out there orbiting us, you know, like a satellite would. And in fact, it is technically a satellite. And then there's the moving stuff, whether it be meteor in the form of natural or moving like this little guy that's being passed around. Now, as far as the sun's concerned, the sun and the composition of the Earth together play a role as far as developing an ionosphere that does propagation. The stuff that we're most interested in is, you know, not the skip and so forth that, you know, gets you countries terrestrially on 20 meters or whatever, but the stuff that is VHF, UHF that goes through the atmosphere and gets these little guys up above. So that's what we're most interested in. As far as the moon is concerned, back in the early days, as a passive reflector, you can send a signal up to it, bounce it back down. It's Earth, moon bounce, whatever you want to call it. It used to take huge array antennas like this guy over here, which is really hard to see, but it's a bunch of 2-meter beams, all together. A lot of gain on the front end and power to get the signal to bounce up and around. So today's EME, it still requires power, but much less elaborate equipment because we have stuff like Whisper, and some of the other digital modes that allow you to hear something that us humans wouldn't be able to hear. Early days of moon bounce, it was send a CW signal up and listen for that CW signal on the other end. And you had a long distance call around the world to a ham that was trying to hear you. Anyway, the more interesting stuff is all this man-made things, that's out in space. We've got the space station and we've got satellites. Amateur radio on the ISS, we've got a lot of hams that are up in the space station right now. And, primarily their focus is on education. So they're doing uplink, downlink, doing camera, doing voice, pretending like they're a satellite, for education, not really talking to the hams that are on the space station like back in the old days. And, for us, in this room, they've got APRS, they've got a digipeater up on the space station, and occasionally they do slow scan downlinks. So kind of fun stuff. As far as satellites go, I'm going to talk a little bit about the history of satellites. And, as with a lot of things, whether you're talking DMR that has its separate lexicon of things like code plugs and, color codes and things like that. Yeah, satellite guys, we've got our own, jargon that we use. And then going to talk a little bit about the equipment that is required to use a satellite. So back in history, the first thing that got launched, the Ruskies beat us out with Sputnik, and it was nothing more than just something that was a beacon in space going dit, 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 not very exciting. And our first thing in space, even less exciting, was Echo, which is this big, aluminized balloon, basically, that's in space, sending things back up and down. Organizations, we've got AMSATs around the planet. So we've got AMSAT North America, we've got AMSAT UK, Japan. So this is the amateur satellite organization that I belong to. And later they designated the satellites that are part of AMSAT as OSCAR, which is orbiting satellites carrying amateur radio. And of course, there are other satellite organizations that do their own thing. Now, most interesting, when I first graduated from college, went down to SoCal, AO7 was launched from Vandenberg. And about 8 years into its life cycle, the thing died. And, the solar panels and the charger controller that were part of the little set, the little CubeSat that's being passed around, one of the things is a battery pack / charge controller. Anyway, in time, the solar panels eventually caused an open in the battery circuit, and about 10, 12 years ago, this thing came back to life. So here this thing is, 44 years later, orbiting, and it's a high Earth orbit satellite, so it's got a much better footprint on the Earth than others do. So the current birds, like I said, come from the US, from Europe, from the Middle East, Japan, and China has recently got into the act. So what do these things look like, that aren't made out of cardboard? This is a CubeSat. You can see, a power supply with batteries. There's obviously an RF section. There's a computer control section. And all of that is what's considered a U-class payload in a 4x4x4 inch payload that has to weigh less than 3 pounds. The reason why is that the launch vehicle, I'm probably in the way for some folks, aren't I? Anyway, It has to be a low weight, because every ounce of a launch is something that gets charged for. And the 4x4x4, there's a cartridge of satellites that go into that 4x4 section that are incrementally pushed out into space once it reaches its orbital altitude. So like I say, there's all the different boards that are inside the thing, one of which is, and if you look at the model, you see the tape measure that's going through the satellite. There's a module that is the burn the little wires that hold the tape measure in place, because, a tape measure, it remembers that it's supposed to be out like that, as opposed to being rolled up. So there's a little control board that deploys the antennas. So it's oftentimes 2 meters, 70 centimeter. So now let's go into some of the acronyms and terms that we use, and then we'll talk some techie space stuff. And if you have any questions as we go along, stop me and ask, and maybe I will be able to have an answer for you. So start off with a footprint. This is what the satellite sees projected on the Earth. So it may be, depending on the orbit of the satellite, it's the area that is covered by a satellite that you can see up and down. It varies between 500 kilometers to 18,000 kilometers, basically the footprint of the Earth. AOS, LOS, the acquisition of signal when the satellite comes above the horizon, loss of signal when it goes down the other way, and the apex is the highest point on the path of the satellite. We've got, different orbits. There's a low Earth orbit. There's a geostationary orbit, of which we don't have any in the satellite community yet. It's part of the plan. Then there's also the higher Earth orbit. And the orbits vary between about 200 to 26,000 miles. Usually, in the case of the low Earth orbit, they're about 400 miles up. Yes?
Do they do any of the really elliptical ones?
Most of the satellites that are up right now are polar orbits. The Chinese have launched a couple of hemispheric specific, and the Argentines actually launched one that is also hemispheric that we can't see from here. That's LU-68 or something like that. Good question. So these little rascals, this little guy here moving along in the 400-mile up orbit at 16,000 miles an hour, that's a pretty fast thing to be shooting for. So we've got past predictions software, things like SAT-PC32. There's a predictor on the AMSAT website. There's various other predictors out there in software to say, well, if I'm going to do this satellite thing, when is it going to work for me? It's going to work for you when you can see the darn thing. Well, where am I going to see it starting? So you got to have all of this stuff as far as a past predictor. The low Earth orbit satellites typically have and depending on where the apex is, anywhere between about a 12-minute orbit down to just minutes worth of orbit. So one of the past predictors is, from AMSAT, and, you put in things like, what satellite are you looking for? There's a pull down that lists a lot more of the satellites. What your grid square is, unless, of course, you know your lat-lon, and then, predict it. So it'll come back and give you stuff like, on a given date, when is the satellite going to first appear? This is all UTC. How long is it going to be in the sky for me? Where is it going to be from a compass rose standpoint? Oh, it's going to appear here. It's going to go up to 14. So this is an ascending satellite orbit. And then loss of signal, there. So from a more practical standpoint, this is what we're looking at. It appears over the horizon at this point and gets up to a high spot. That may be so many degrees elevation from the horizon, and then finally loses it here. What I'm illustrating for the FM satellites is the impact on Doppler. that there's a frequency Doppler shift, much like when you hear a railroad or a train coming, it starts off high and eventually goes low. Same thing with satellite, except for it's in RF land. And in order to track this, we have things like 2-axis, rotators. This is a SPID rotator system from Poland. Okay, uplink, downlink. The way that best think of a satellite is it's a crossband repeater. So that's the easy way to think of this thing. You send up on one frequency, comes back down on a different one. So those are the modes of what frequencies are we talking about? We've got AO7 that does 10 meters. We've got other satellites that do 2 70 centimeter. We've got a satellite that is just freshly up that'll be on 23 centimeters. The way that these are expressed is, we use uppercase for the uplink, lowercase for the downlink. So something like SO50, which is a Saudi Arabian launched satellite, is a VU. So you send a VHF signal up and you listen on UHF coming back down. We've got transponders out there, the repeaters that are linear versus nonlinear. So the nonlinear ones do the FM, and we've also got satellites that do single sideband CW. The nonlinear birds, we've got these guys operational right at the moment. SO50, Oscar 85, and 91. That was recently launched. We've got the ISS that is doing APRS packet, and from the Navy we've got NO84 that also does packet using FM modulation. In the case of AO91, that was also referred to as the Fox 1B, the CubeSat that was launched back this previous Thanksgiving, and about 2 weeks after it was launched, it was opened up for amateur service. This is a really strong satellite. I'll go into that in just a little bit. Another one that's coming soon, it actually was launched last Friday, not yesterday, but the previous week. They're doing evaluation of the telemetry and making sure that this is going to work before they unleash it on the world. But this will be another really strong satellite that will be open for use probably in the next couple of weeks. Linear satellites, we've got the old tried and true AO7, 73, so forth and so on. This one is Fujisat, that's the Japanese, and then these two are Chinese linear satellites. So there's a lot of birds up there that one can work and play with. Other thing that is of interest is that in the case of the transponders, you've got inverting and non-inverting. And what that really means is an inverting satellite, if you are transmitting on the uplink on this particular frequency, the whole bandpass starts here and say maybe goes for 20 kilohertz up. That 20 kilohertz is translated on the downlink, inverted in frequency and in sideband. So if it's upper sideband going up, it'll become lower sideband going down, and it'll be at the opposite end of the bandpass. So it's just something to be aware of. The bandpasses are typically between 20 kilohertz wide. In the case of FO29, it's 100 kilohertz wide. A really nice wide area that, unlike FM, there's plenty of room for everybody. FM, it's more like a repeater around here. Only one, the strongest station, can actually work the satellite. Okay, in Doppler shift, there's a lot more impact on the shorter wavelength signals than on VHF. So if you've got a 70 centimeter, 2 meter, the shift on the UHF side will be a lot greater than it will be on the coming down 2 meter link. All right, then there's full duplex versus half duplex. Why is that interesting? Anybody venture a guess?
Be able to multitask radio. But we have them coming out at the same time.
Well, that's what's going on. I mean, the crossband repeat is doing that. But the reason why that you want to be full duplex down here on Earth is if the path predictor says the satellite's supposed to be back there, and I'm pointing over here, I can't hear myself. I mean, you can effectively work half duplex on the satellites with a single HT, but by having a full duplex system, now you're able to receive yourself on the downlink. And it, unless you were in broadcasting, it takes a little bit to get used to hearing yourself on a pair of headphones, because the headphones are important for the feedback reasons. So,
delay or whatever.
And there's hardly a delay, but it's not enough of a delay that you don't avoid the feedback. So I can tell you that firsthand. But if you can say, I'm pointing to the satellite over there, and maybe it's really over there, I can actually determine that that difference and hear it. So, oh yeah, there's where I'm the strongest, or I need to be a little higher, or whatever it was. Anyway, full duplex is good. Now, let's go into grid squares. Grid squares were started by those darn Brits, like with GMT. Greenwich? Yeah, why Greenwich? Why not someplace else in the world? So Maidenhead in the UK is the name of a town that they decided to come up with this surveyor's thing about expressing where you are on Earth within a lat long, 2 degrees one way and 1 degree the other way, and express it in the case of letters and numbers. So in our case, here in Loveland, at the crudest or the second biggest level, we are DN70. And this is actually showing it graphically. So DN70 actually encompasses from 106 west, 104 west, and 40 degrees, which is baseline in Boulder, which was a surveyor's baseline. Isn't that clever? Up to the Wyoming border. And it's actually not the Wyoming border, but the old surveying techniques were a little bit off. So anyway, that's our grid square. And why are these interesting? Well, some of you out there are probably paper collectors, right? So give me DXCC, give me worked all states. Let's make it more of a challenge. Let's do it on satellites. And in the satellite world, as far as the ARRL is concerned, VHF, UHF Century Club, 100 grids. Oh boy. There are, in the continental United States, 488 grid squares. Those can be just a little tiny sliver of land on some military reserved island out in the Pacific, like San Clemente Island. That can be continental United States grid square. How do you get those? Anyway, there's a AMSAT award for working 100 satellites. You can do DXCC and worked all states. I'm currently sitting at, from Estes Park, I'm sitting at 48 states worked on satellites. And I have, I think at this point, 12 countries. But the one that I'm a little bit more interested in is this thing about rovers. And I'm not talking about the Kennel Club coming and occupying satellite bands, but there's also an award for the Century Club in roving land. So I am a rover, and here I am out roving in DN61 up in Wyoming, someplace east of Wamsutter. And oh, this is really cool. And my XYL, who's sitting over here, she's the smart one. I'm out standing in a big coat and everything. She's inside the warm car. So much smarter than I am. This is a buddy of mine that, this is a now world famous, because I think this is on the either 2017 or 2018 ARRL calendar. This is Fernando. Lives down in Nogales, but he was up roving in Grand Canyon for National Parks on the Air, which was also fun to do on satellites. And this is not something just for us old guys. This is something that she's down in Montgomery, no, it's not Montgomery, Birmingham, Alabama. and doing satellite work. Just talked to her from Laramie just this last week. So what do you need? Let's get down to brass tacks of making all this stuff come together and work. So what do you really need? Radios, antennas. It is ham radio, you know. So we can either do it the fun way and spend boatloads of money, or we can be really cheap. Let me tell you, both work just fine. So in the expensive, you can have multi-mode transceivers, you can have Yagis up all over the place, circularly polarized, low noise amplifiers out the wazoo, you can do dual axis rotators, you can do hardline going up there, and have lots and lots of compute power, displays.
I'm showing up just to see your station.
And Ham's showing up to see the station. One of my good friends down in the Memphis area, we joke about his station, and it says, "Yeah, this is the bridge of the Enterprise. This isn't a ham station." But you saw me. I'm out there, HT, antenna in hand, headphones. That's all I need. Anyway, multiple displays, software out the wazoo to control, the radios, pass predictor stuff, just boatloads. Or you can do it on the cheap. You can have a couple of cheapo HTs. Another station I know has a couple of Baofungs. You can have an Arrow, which helps support local business up in Cheyenne. Or you can have an Elk, basically a log periodic. You can do a homebrew antenna. Example over here. This is my first attempt at doing the homebrew cheapo 2-element, 2 meters and 5 on 440. Hey, works just fine. And there's a project that this guy put together, activities for ham clubs. Build antennas. Gosh, what a novel idea. Or you can go El Cheapo and just do a single HT and do an SDR. Plug it into the computer, let the computer control the frequency. That's kind of cool. And again, do the homebrew antenna. So what does that all translate to? Maybe $70. You can be on satellites. Most hams that are in this room probably have an HT or two. And, really the next thing that is some kind of an antenna that does both bands, that's portable and not so hard to use that you can't use the Armstrong rotator, which is great because you can also adjust for polarity of the satellite as the satellite spins around in space and changes polarization. Anyway, my station, my entire roving station is here in this little case. And I think everything that I have on my list here, dual band HTs, like the old 80s, 90 Yaesu 530, a Kenwood still being produced, D72, which is full, both of those are full duplex, or you can say remote base, whatever. And I also have a FT1634, which is a clever satellite ease way of saying I've got two 817 strapped together. But that's all the power that I need is in that little bit of 5 watts. I don't have anything more than 5 watts in the entire thing. I can do a handheld dual band antenna that has a duplexer on it. I can use a single feed line from my HTs, or I can use 2 feed lines from each of the 817s, a headset, and a digital recorder. That's my station. I've got a few other trinkets and other things in here that, if I have time, we can do a little show and tell on it. So here I am roving. I've got the 817 before I actually had a strap them together system, but both of them are suspended around the neck, headphones on, HT. There's my little recorder, my little breakout. So I'm working a fairly rare grid out in northwest Kansas, north of St. Francis. I also have done motorcycle roving. So that's strap on the antenna on the back. I've got headset that I put in the bag up front, and the HT. This is just for photo opportunity going through Rocky Mountain National Park. So if you want more information, There's all kinds of stuff on amsat.org. For operating on SO50, this guy has got an incredible wealth of information about how to do the Doppler shift and all the other good things. There's YouTube demonstrations, Periscope and Twitter. Twitter seems to be the bulletin board for hams operating on satellites. So one fellow yesterday was up kind of northwest of Spokane, Washington, in a fairly unpopulated area, roving for people that are doing the grid hunting. He announced that he was doing that on Twitter. You can contact some local Elmers. Myself, I was looking for Jeremy being in here or Aaron that have, done a lot of satellite stuff in the past. But anyway, you can contact me at my email address, and I'd be happy to help out. I'm only up in Estes Park, so can come down and operate some sat with you. Okay, where do you want to start? So here are the frequencies of AO85, AO91, and actually you can listen right now on AO92 that was launched just last week. And the frequencies are listed here. Nice thing about these satellites is that they're so strong that if you have them on a scanner and you've got a little antenna to go with that, as they go over, and you're not looking at the path predictor software, when they go over, the scanner will suddenly come to life and you'll hear people talking and go, hey, this is great. I mean, they're really strong satellites. But this is not a group of shortwave listeners. No? Okay. So how do we program these things for operation? And I'm going to use an example of SO50 because that's where I started back in 2014. So the dual band HT, or that does remote base, crossband repeat, whatever you want to call it, is the best way to go. Or you can use a couple of HTs. Using a couple of Baofungs isn't going to set you back a whole lot. So you need 7 channels to be defined. The 7 channels in this particular case, since this is a capital V, small u, you're looking at receiving the downlink on those downlinked frequencies, adjusting for Doppler. On the uplink, you need to have the capability to provide a PL tone. In the case of SO50, it's 67 hertz tone is the make it activate, but this one, unlike a lot of the other ones, has a built-in timer. So if it is quiet for a while, it says, oh, let's shut down and charge the batteries. And you have to have a different tone for getting that adjusted, which is right here. So that'll turn the satellite on. You don't need a receive frequency for it. With my radio, I can adjust 1/2 of it for the uplink, and then here adjusting for Doppler is the downlink side as I'm receiving. It becomes clearly evident, as you're listening, when you have to adjust for Doppler. It's like somebody's not transmitting quite on the same repeater frequency that they need to be, and I can't quite understand. Then you just, oh, there you are, nice and clear again. What else can you have? Excuse me. Multiple headsets, a compass. Compass is kind of handy if you're in a place where you don't know your geographic references. Like I was roving back in Delaware where they don't have anything above 80 feet, I think, is the highest point in the state, and you can't see it. So give me the compass. Oh yeah, there's the sun. That helps, but compass helps even more. A splitter and digital recorder, but really the thing I need when I'm out roving is some more hands, and I'll show you that with show and tell time. But being able, and she's so clever with PowerPoint, she gave me 4 hands. All right, so now what's next? You got your HT, you got your antenna, you got your path predictor, so you know the track of the satellite, you know when it's supposed to be there, you got all this stuff ready, you're equipped, ready to go, let's do it. So, open the squelch up. this is not going to start off really strong when you're looking at it over the horizon. So you got the squelch open and listening to a lot of noise that she doesn't like. But when it starts to come to life, you go, yeah, I've acquired the bird at AOS. This is great. So you point and you track the satellite. And most important of all, and this actually applies for HF as well, is listen and listen some more, and maybe even listen some more. You know, find out what the protocol is, find out, you know, where the bird is, and then finally transmit. Okay, so what does it all sound like?
N6UA, November 0, Juliet Echo, N6UA, Delta November 60, Jerry. Delta, GN86, thanks for another grid. No. 6UA, Kilo 6, Foxtrot Whiskey. 6 Foxtrot Whiskey, November 6, Uniform Alpha, Delta November 60. QSL to GN60, Delta Mike 14, thank you, Doug. No. N6UA, DE6WK. 6WK, N6UA, good afternoon, Bill, Delta November 60. Thanks for the N60, Doug. Delta Oscar 20 here. Oh. 6UA, November 6, Zulu Zulu Oscar. F7M. November 6, Zulu Zulu Oscar, N6UA, and Delta November 60. Much I have for you, Charlie November 70. Charlie November 70. Bill, Charlie November 70.
So that's an FM satellite. And, you know, they can be clear. But, you know, I was out operating out in Kremling and doing the DN60 grid square. So on that little, you know, excerpt, you heard a station in North Dakota, one down in Los Angeles, working DX, you know, Bill up in Calgary. And the final one was on the California, Oregon border. So anyway, that's a low Earth orbit satellite. In the particular case of low Earth, I had a QSO from a station up in Teller, Alaska, as I was sitting at the McDonald's parking lot just across the border in Wyoming, getting this guy a new grid, new state, blah, blah, blah. The fun things that we do, but that was probably one of the longer contacts I had distance-wise, and we had a footprint window of maybe 1 minute and 15 seconds to complete the whole QSO. But you heard how short those are. It's, you know, pretty much just, you know, grid square, call sign, you know, blah, blah, and that's about it. Actually, maybe my longest was from Delaware to a station in the Azores. There was maybe a 45-second window. Okay, so the pass is indeed short in the case of low Earth orbit satellites. 4 to 14, high Earth orbit, it can be up to 20, 24 minutes. And with FM, a lot of people are trying to use the channel. That last QSO that I had, heard the station call me, immediately some other guy came in, and I got around him after he made his call, and we, you know, completed the QSO. But it's a lot of people trying to use it at once. So what's the protocol? Yeah, it's pretty straightforward. If I'm, you know, someplace and announcing, you know, N6UA, DN70, you know, I'm really doing November 6 Uniform Alpha, Delta November 70. Yeah, as clear as you can, pretend like you're handling traffic or something. Now, if I'm calling somebody that I hear, I can be calling my buddy Clayton down in Texas and just say, W5 Papa Fox Golf, you're 59 in Delta November 70 in 6 Uniform Alpha. And then we wrap up the QSO, W5 PFG QSL, your EM, you know, 1273, see ya. Really short, doesn't take much more than like 10, 15 seconds for a QSO. So anyway, you keep it short and sweet, unless, of course, you know, nobody's using it. Like you go up to Estes and say, gosh, am I going to tie up the repeater up here? No, you're bringing up the repeater for the first time today. Talk all you want. You can also, you know, some of the guys get a little long-winded on some of the satellite passes. And yeah, the weather's pretty nice down here in Southern California. Yeah, go rub it in. Thanks a lot.
The guy does that remote. The station.
And there are a lot of people that have remote sat stations. And that's pretty popular. You know, this last week I was able to give the guys down in the Gulf Coast a bit of grief, saying, yeah, it's about 50 degrees up here in Colorado. What do you have in New Orleans? Oh, about 2 inches of snow. Yeah.
It's closed.
Anyway, okay, so the final courtesy of a QSO is a QSL, right? So you can use Logbook of the World to do this, and Logbook of the World, this is actually running TQSL, has a place for satellite. And once you've done the satellite pull down, there's a pull down here to say which satellite. And you can specify frequencies and all the other good stuff. And then when you get it via the web browser Logbook of the World, yeah, they all show up. And a column that ARRL still hasn't made a selection for is under the band side, you can't specify SAT, you know, when you're trying to sort a report coming out of Logbook of the World, but no big deal. Maybe someday. Or you can QSL the old way. And these are some of the stations I've talked to in the past. Bob in Hawaii was kind of a real treat one day on FO29 where nobody else was on the satellite. And, hey, hi, Bob. And got to talk to him for a minute or so, you know, while he was in the footprint. And, of course, you know, there's DX that's lurking out there as well. So anyway, the bottom line is in satellite operations, the whole thing about ham radio is to have fun with it. Don't take it too seriously, but, you know, go on, have some fun with this. And again, technicians can do this as well. So anyway, quickly talked about some of the natural things out in space, the man-made stuff, and how to use the satellites. So if you have questions, feel free to ask. I can also do some show and tell now. So, yes, sir.
Can you explain how many of these are operating and who owns and operates these satellites typically?
Okay, how many? It's a fairly long list of sats that are actually up and going, you know, that are in service. Satellites are not cheap to develop, deploy. You know, anybody that has worked with CU LASP knows just how expensive these little rascals are. So trying to find a launch vehicle, a launch time, all that kind of stuff. So those groups that I had earlier, the AMSATs of the world, they're usually the sponsoring organization. It's member contributions. It's time, energy from engineers that are doing stuff with satellites on their days off. As far as a guesstimate of how many are up there, I would say at this point we probably have somewhere on the order of 30 to 40 of them up there. Some of them start off as university research satellites. We had one that was a European satellite that is still kind of toggled between telemetry mode and research. And then on the weekends, they switch it over to a transponder, so you can ham it up on their satellite. We've got, I think in the case of 92, there's some camera stuff on board that Virginia Tech and I want to say University of Iowa have jointly done that are doing photographs of the Earth or things of that nature. In the case of the space station, that's pretty obvious. They're doing all sorts of science. Oh, and I've got a 15-minute break. Let's go off and do some kind of an educational seminar where K-12 kids are asking questions of the astronauts in that little 12, 15-minute window that they have. So there's a lot of different things that are up there, and how they got up there is pretty individual as far as the satellites are concerned. But it's definitely a good question about, well, yeah, what do we do? Just throw something up there and hope for the best? Anyway, okay, my rover station in the, I'm going to drive the camera guy nuts here because I'm going to open this up where you guys can actually see. Open the thing up. I've got frequency guides of where things are supposed to be, frequency-wise, so I know the operating parameters. I've got that. I've got an iPad that is, let's see, set up for, come on, same day service with a smile, is satellite prediction software that's graphic. So you can actually see the satellite, know when it's supposed to come. You can say, give me what it looks like from an orbital standpoint. You know, where am I going to find it? You know, if you don't like looking at the numbers and figures there. So that helps out a whole lot. And it's also my Twitter feed when I can find Wi-Fi someplace in the world. Then it gets down to the guts of the ham stuff, which is, you know, radio. This is the, you know, FT 1634 or 2 times 817s. This is my linear station. I can use it for FM if I want. So that's something that I have. It runs off batteries. You can you can make it a much shorter battery life and kick it up to 5 watts. Normally I just run it at 2.5, or I have a separate battery pack that I can, you know, carry around if I want. Headphones. That's for the full duplex side, keeping the feedback out. Then I have ancient FT530 that does crossband repeat. This is what I started with the satellites, so I can...
It was the same HT when I got my license on the cover of the book.
There you go. So, I mean, it works just fine for satellite use. If you have one, I encourage you to go out and get an Arrow and start playing.
I don't have one.
And then, if I'm wanting to do APRS with the ISS or the other orbiting APRS satellite, this is the Kenwood D72. And it also is good for doing full duplex circuit as well. And then, of course, you know, the other stuff is accessories like pins, operate off the car, microphones, extra antennas, extra coax, a little accessory case of, you know, the digital recorder, connectors, a breakout, and if somebody else is coming along with me, I can put in the earbuds, hand them the headphones. We can all, you know, record the conversations. We can record the contacts. You know, multiple people can do this at one time. So this is the station that I use when I'm out roving. Any other questions? Yes, sir.
Do you have a station at home for working in any deals?
I live in a condo, and it would be probably frowned on having antennas that are, you know, going into space and, you know, stuff like that. But actually, every operation I do, I tell my Twitter satellite buddies, every operation I do is roving. So I rove to the driveway out front of the condo for, you know, passes that are west. Then I go to the deck for the passes that are to the east. And unfortunately, to the east, since I do live in Estes, my horizon starts at about 11, 12 degrees. But I have been able to work a fellow down on Guadalupe Island out in the Caribbean on one of the satellites from the deck. Where the pass was maybe 11 degrees or 10 degrees, and I just happened to find a sweet spot in the notch in the hills over by Highway 30 or 36. Yes, sir.
Do you have any 6-meter satellites?
You know, that's a very good question, and the answer is no, not at this point. We are in the roadmap for satellites going to have one on 15 meters. Coming soon. We currently have 10 meters. You know, that's depending on what mode AO7 is in. So it can flip between, you know, different modes. And that's a whole long discussion right there. But, you know, it does have that capability. Other questions?
Have you ever worked the ISS or the Space Shuttle?
Not voice. I have done ISS on packet and probably, I don't know, a dozen or so contacts through ISS Digipeater. And, you know, that's a little harder to do. And, you know, I much prefer voice, you know, for the satellites. I haven't done CW. There was an event, I think it was a New Year's event, saying, okay, let's start off the operation of the satellites in the new year on CW, on the linear birds, of course. And you go, I don't know about that. But I did copy somebody that was on one of the linear birds on CW, and I talked back to him on voice and had a QSO that way. So half duplex, kind of, whatever. Other questions?
Is there a website, I guess, what is the best website to go to if you wanted to get information about these satellites and the frequencies?
I would say amsat.org. They provide information about communication satellite, digital satellites. The communication are broken into linear versus nonlinear satellites. So all the information that you could probably need there is there. There's also some other websites like Celestrak. Do you know any of the others, Jeremy?
Heavens above.
Yeah.
Has more than just amateur satellites, has all the different things up there.
They have a website that you can actually use for spotting satellites in sunrise, sunset.
Yes. And my son, who's not a ham at all, was with me when we were over in Utah on a visit once, and said, here's what your crazy dad does. So I said, okay, I'm going to talk through the ISS, and it looks like, it was evening, so we should be able to see the ISS. And he's watching the ISS go by, gets the binocs out, he's looking at the solar panels on the ISS, it goes by, I'm making a contact, he goes, hey, that's pretty darn cool. You can do all this on radio, and we can see the thing. And then I did a couple of QSOs on one of the FM satellites that was shortly after. So he said, yeah, you may be a geek, Dad, but it's pretty cool. Yeah, I know. But see, this, like I said in the beginning of the presentation, this is someplace where technicians can get really technical. This is good tech. This is the most excitement I've had in ham radios, like I said, since I was a novice back in the 60s. So all good stuff.